I didn't realize how fast a room could turn on you until the moment my boss saw the number 12,048,317 next to my name on a due diligence slide that I wasn't supposed to be on. 1 second, I was the guy who fixed broken spreadsheets and double-checked cash flow models at 2 a.m. The next second, I was no longer Grant from finance. I was a liquid asset sitting in a swivel chair. And the worst part, I could see the exact moment they stopped seeing me as a person. You have to understand something before the rest of this makes sense. I never wanted to be rich. Not in the way people imagine it. When my co-founder and I sold our small fintech startup 6 years ago, the payout was life-changing. Sure. But by the time taxes, fees, and vesting schedules were done with me, I walked away with just over $12 million and a kind of exhaustion that didn't feel like victory. I didn't buy a yacht. I didn't move to Miami. I bought a modest 3-bedroom house with a garage door that sticks when it rains, kept my old truck, and took an analyst position in a mid-sized construction supply company because I missed routine more than I missed risk. Some people crave adrenaline. I crave predictability. And for a while, I had it. The job wasn't glamorous, but it made sense. Numbers behave if you treat them right. People, not so much. My boss, Victor, was the kind of man who loved saying words like ownership and family in staff meetings, but used them like weapons. Our CEO, Martin, had the charisma of a man who truly believed he deserved applause for entering a room. Neither of them cared about the back office crew unless something went wrong. But I'd dealt with worse in the startup world, and honestly, it felt easier to just keep my head down and work. Then the company's margins started shrinking. Supply costs climbed. A couple of contracts went sideways, and the board began hinting at strategic financing opportunities, which is corporate language for, we need money, and we need it yesterday. So for weeks, I'd been knee-deep in financial models, scenarios, cash flow sensitivity analyses. I wasn't excited about the board meeting, but I wasn't afraid of it either. It was just numbers. Just another room full of people pretending not to panic. That morning, I arrived early to run through my slides one last time. Everything looked clean. The forecast wasn't pretty, but it was honest. I'd spent too many years watching founders lie to themselves to ever play that game again. Around 8:50 a.m., Victor came over with that tight smile he uses when he's about to ask for something he knows I won't like. "Grant," he said, tapping the conference table as if it were a drum, "just so you know, the investor doing the preliminary review might ask about your background." I didn't react. My background? Well, you know, that little tech thing you did. They like to understand the team's entrepreneurial exposure. No one in this company had ever cared about my entrepreneurial exposure before. Most didn't even remember the name of my old startup, but his tone had that strange mix of casual and probing, like he was searching for something he wasn't sure I'd admit. "I'll answer whatever is relevant," I said. He nodded too quickly. "Good. Good. Just keep everything aligned with the company's narrative." I didn't like that phrasing. Aligned with the company's narrative always means don't say something that makes us look bad. But I didn't press. I had work to finish. By 9:05, the boardroom was full. Leather chairs, polished table, overpriced coffee that tasted burnt anyway. The external investor's representative, a quiet guy named Hartley, sat near the middle, flipping through the printed packets. I remember thinking he looked too calm for someone about to hear how bad our quarter had been. I started running through my part: revenue dips, volatility in supply chain pricing, proposed cuts, the usual ugly math. The room was tense but manageable. Then Hartley casually turned a page and said, "Before we continue, could we address something from the preliminary background report?" I didn't know I was in that report. Martin smiled politely. "Of course. What do you need clarified?" Hartley tapped the page with a pen. "Here, under key personnel, specifically the note about Mr. Lawson's prior company sale." My stomach dropped a little. Victor's head snapped toward me. I could see it happening already, curiosity sharpening into calculation, but I stayed still. If there's one thing the startup world teaches you, it's how to sit perfectly calm while every variable rearranges around you. Hartley continued. According to public records and acquisition filings, Mr. Lawson completed an exit valued at, he adjusted his glasses, just over 12 million net after taxes. The room went silent. It wasn't the number that stunned them. It was the fact that they had never known. Martin leaned back in his chair with a slow, predatory smile. Victor blinked at me as if I'd personally betrayed him. Someone near the end of the table whispered something like, 12? As if I were a malfunctioning ATM they were trying to reset. I felt every eye in the room land on me like weight. I opened my mouth, ready to clarify. Not to brag, not to defend, just to explain that my past wasn't relevant to the company's financial health. But Martin cut me off with a raised hand. We'll circle back to that, he said, though his tone made it clear that this was now the meeting. The moment he said it, I understood something I probably should have realized years ago. To people like him, money isn't just influence, it's gravity. It pulls their attention, their assumptions, their entitlement, straight toward the nearest source. And in that room, that source was me. A minute later, the meeting resumed, but nothing felt the same. Every nod, every glance had changed direction. I wasn't presenting numbers anymore. I was being evaluated. By the time I finished my slides, Victor wouldn't even look at me. And Hartley, who had simply been stating facts, had unknowingly lit the fuse. I didn't know it then, but that single disclosure was about to cost them far more than they ever imagined. And that was only the first crack. The room didn't know it yet, but the way they looked at me in that moment would be the beginning of their unraveling. When the board meeting finally ended, people filtered out in groups of 2 or 3, still whispering. No one said anything directly to me, but I could feel the shift in the air, like a room where someone had just opened a window and let in a cold wind. Victor avoided my eyes. Martin gave me a tight, thoughtful smile that wasn't friendly at all. He looked like a man who had just discovered a locked drawer and was deciding whether he deserved the key. I packed my laptop slowly, hoping to slip out before either of them cornered me. I should have known better. As soon as I stepped into the hallway, Martin's voice echoed after me. Grant, a word he didn't ask, he summoned. Victor was already waiting inside Martin's office, standing stiffly by the window with his arms crossed. The air smelled like that expensive cologne executives use when they want to smell successful. Martin shut the door with a soft click. So, he began, leaning back against his desk, $12 million. There was no congratulations in his voice, no curiosity, just expectation, entitlement, thinly coated in politeness. That figure is from years ago, I said calmly. Most of it's invested long term. I'm not sitting on piles of cash. Martin waved a hand. Of course. But it does mean you're comfortable. He smiled like he'd just done me a favor by stating it. Victor stepped forward. Look, we're in a delicate moment. The company needs stability, real stability, and frankly, it would send a powerful message if someone on the inside showed confidence in our future. There it was, the real reason for this meeting. What exactly are you suggesting? I asked, even though I already knew. Martin clasped his hands. A bridge loan, $2 million, short term, favorable terms. You'd be helping your colleagues, your team. We can formalize it as a subordinated note, maybe convertible if that interests you. It doesn't, I said before he finished the sentence. Victor's jaw tightened. This is about loyalty, Grant. We're asking you to step up for the company that pays you very well. I didn't react to the jab. I'm not a bank, I said. My money isn't here to patch operational issues. That's not my role. Martin sighed dramatically as if I'd disappointed him personally. You're part of this family. Families invest in each other. I do invest, I said, in transparent, structured opportunities, not in situations where my job security suddenly depends on my wallet. Victor took a step closer. No one said that. He didn't need to. Both of them knew what they were implying. I kept my voice steady. If the company needs capital, you should seek it through proper channels. Institutional investors, lenders, strategic partners, not employees' personal accounts. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Martin smiled again, but it was sharper this time. Well, he said, think about it. We'll revisit this soon. There was no thinking to do. As I walked back to my desk, I could feel the walls of the office tightening around me. People who would normally nod or stop by to ask about a report now glanced away as I passed. A couple of managers whispered openly when I walked by, the way people gossip about lottery winners, part envy, part suspicion. By the end of the week, the shift became official. My quarterly bonus, one I had already earned through months of overtime, suddenly could not be approved due to budget constraints. A project I'd led for 6 months was reassigned to a junior manager with half my experience. My calendar began filling with busy work, vendor audits no one cared about, data cleaning tasks usually handed to interns, tedious reconciliations that didn't require my level of expertise. Each task arrived with a polite email from Victor that began with something like, "Given your skill set, I'm confident you can handle this quickly." Translation, "You didn't give us money, so now you're going to pay in other ways." But here's the thing, I don't break easily. I've lived through founder breakups, investor betrayals, a hostile acquisition, and nights when my net worth swung 6 figures in either direction because someone misread a market trend. Compared to that, corporate pettiness is just noise. So instead of reacting, I started observing. I saved every email, every calendar invite, every performance note suddenly added to my file. I documented conversations immediately afterward. Dates, times, exact phrasing. Not because I planned a lawsuit, because pressure makes patterns, and patterns tell stories. I needed the full story. A week later, I met with my personal attorney, an old friend from my startup days, someone who knows the difference between legal advice and strategic advice. He listened carefully as I laid everything out. "This isn't about them wanting you to invest," he said finally. "It's about power. They see you as a non-compliant asset. They're trying to bring you back under control." "I figured," I said. He looked at me for a long moment. "So what are you going to do? Because you're not stupid enough to lend them money." "No," I said, "but I'm also not stupid enough to stay reactive." He smiled. "Then you're ready for the second option." That's when he brought up the fund, a private equity group with a reputation for turning around mid-sized companies. Not hostile, but firm, smart, structured, real adults in a room full of executives who liked pretending to be adults. My attorney happened to know one of the partners. I agreed to a meeting, strictly exploratory. I wasn't planning to sabotage my company. I just wanted perspective. What I wasn't expecting was how quickly the fund recognized the same cracks I'd been seeing for months. They asked good questions. They listened. They didn't want secrets. They wanted context, the kind any independent consultant could legally provide. When they realized I understood the internal numbers better than anyone, they offered me a formal role, external financial advisor for their assessment of the company. Clean, ethical, documented, within legal boundaries. It felt like breathing fresh air again. For the first time since that board meeting, I wasn't the one being cornered. I was the one choosing a direction. A week later, after careful due diligence on my end, I invested a portion of my portfolio with the fund, not into my company, but into their broader investment vehicle. It was small by their standards, meaningful by mine, and structured in a way that gave me no operational leverage, only alignment. It was the first step toward something I didn't fully see yet. But looking back, that was the moment everything truly started to shift. Because the next time Victor tried to pressure me, something in me quietly clicked into place. I realized they weren't the ones holding the power anymore, and they hadn't noticed the change. Not yet. By the time the next leadership meeting rolled around, the tension in the office felt like static. Everyone sensed that something was off, but no one could name it. Victor had become strangely polite, the brittle kind of polite that cracks if you push on it. Martin barely spoke to me unless other people were watching, and the tasks they kept assigning me? They'd gotten even pettier, as if the goal wasn't productivity, but erosion. A slow grind meant to wear me down, except I wasn't grinding down. I was taking notes. The fund had already started its independent assessment, gathering publicly available data, building a picture of the company's weaknesses. My consulting agreement outlined strict boundaries. I couldn't share proprietary documents, internal forecasts, or anything confidential, but I could analyze whatever they provided, interpret financial structures, and explain industry norms. It was all above board, and more importantly, it gave the fund the context they needed to move faster than Martin or the board realized. What management did realize was that I wasn't bending, and that made them nervous. 2 weeks after the board meeting, Martin called me into his office again. This time Victor was already there, seated stiffly, hands folded as if he were preparing for a disciplinary hearing. "You've had time to think," Martin said. "We need an answer." "I already gave you an answer," I replied. Martin's jaw tightened. "This isn't about money, Grant. It's about commitment. We need to know you're aligned with the company's future." "I'm aligned," I said, "but I'm not financing it." Victor leaned forward. "You do understand that your role involves trust? You see every weakness before anyone else. That requires loyalty. And you're asking me to buy that loyalty with my personal assets?" Silence. Heavy. Accusatory. Martin exhaled sharply. "We are giving you an opportunity to show that you believe in us." I met his eyes. "If you want capital, raise capital. Don't shake down employees." Victor's veneer cracked. "Watch your tone." "No," I said. "For the first time since I started here, I think you're finally hearing mine." He stiffened, but Martin lifted a hand, pretending to play mediator. "Let's not escalate. All we're saying is that we need clarity. If you want to grow here, if you want your role to remain what it is." There it was, the threat they'd been dancing around for weeks. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Everything was already shifting beneath them, and they couldn't feel it yet. 2 days later, something interesting happened. The board circulated an updated agenda for the next meeting. Tucked between capital strategy update and vendor consolidation review was a new line. Discussion. Internal financing options. Employee participation. So that was the plan. They were going to present the idea publicly, paint it as a collective effort, and pressure me into compliance by making everyone else watch. It was sloppy, desperate, and it told me everything I needed to know about how fragile Martin's position truly was. The fund received the agenda the same day, not from me, but through one of their own channels. They already had several shareholders engaged in quiet negotiations, and while I was just a small LP in their broader fund, my involvement gave them insight into the company culture, the governance issues, the pressure tactics, the power imbalance. Nothing illegal, but enough to justify a more aggressive valuation correction, which they used. By the end of the week, the fund had submitted a formal expression of interest to acquire a controlling stake. The letter was professional, understated, and devastating. It outlined potential operational inefficiencies, governance concerns, and the need for structural changes. It didn't blame anyone. It didn't have to. The implications were obvious. The board invited the fund's representative, Hartley, to attend the upcoming meeting as a potential strategic investor. Martin didn't know that was the same Hartley who had read my net worth aloud 2 weeks ago. He also didn't know that the fund already had enough information to make a serious offer, and enough leverage to make it attractive. The morning of the meeting arrived cold and gray. I walked into the boardroom with my laptop under my arm and the strange, steady calm of someone who has already accepted the outcome. Martin greeted everyone with forced enthusiasm. Victor's smile looked like it had been glued on. As the meeting progressed, Martin finally reached the agenda item he'd been waiting for. Before we move to external options, he said, I want to revisit an internal opportunity. Someone on our team has expressed interest in supporting the company financially. My pulse didn't change. My expression didn't change. But across the table, Hartley glanced at me with the barest flicker of recognition. Not surprise, not amusement. Just understanding. Victor cleared his throat. Specifically, Grant Lawson. I haven't expressed any such interest, I said calmly. The room froze. Martin forced a chuckle. Well, Grant, perhaps you're being modest, but we discussed. No, I said. You suggested. And you implied consequences if I declined. I never agreed. A murmur rippled through the board. Martin's face reddened. Grant, let's be professional. I am, I said. And professionally, I'm stating for the record, I will not participate in employee-backed financing, and any attempts to coerce me into it are inappropriate. Victor's chair scraped sharply against the floor. This is out of line. But before he could finish, Hartley calmly raised a hand. If I may, he said, this actually segues into the proposal our fund submitted. Martin blinked. Proposal? Hartley nodded. Yes, we've conducted a preliminary assessment of the company's structure and believe a capital injection makes sense, but not through employee lending. Our model supports a restructuring through majority acquisition, operational oversight, and leadership realignment. The room erupted. Martin sputtered. Victor went sheet white. Several board members leaned in, suddenly alert. For weeks they'd been fed careful narratives about temporary cash flow issues. But this was a structural diagnosis, and they knew it. Hartley continued, undisturbed. We're prepared to make a formal offer pending final diligence. We believe significant value can be unlocked with appropriate governance reforms. Governance reforms in PE language means exactly one thing. The leadership is getting replaced. Martin tried to regain control. This is outrageous. We were not informed. You received our letter last week, Hartley said, and your shareholders have already reviewed the terms. I watched Martin's face crumble in real time. Then came the moment Victor made everything worse for himself. He jabbed a finger toward me. This is him. He coordinated this. He's been working against us. Every head turned to me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. For the record, I said, I am an LP investor in the fund's broader portfolio and an external consultant for their assessment, which is fully documented and within legal bounds. I have disclosed nothing proprietary, shared no confidential data, and participated exactly as outlined in my contract. Hartley nodded in confirmation. That was when the independent board member, a former CFO with zero patience for the corporate theatrics, spoke up. Martin, she said quietly, did you solicit personal financing from an employee without board approval? Silence. Dead, damning silence. Martin opened his mouth, closed it, then stammered. It was an informal conversation. That's not what it sounds like, she said. And for the first time since I joined the company, Martin had no script. The board called a recess for a closed discussion. Martin and Victor were asked to step out. The look Victor shot me as he left the room wasn't anger. It was fear. The realization that he had misread every piece on the board and was only now seeing the checkmate forming around him. As the door shut behind them, the room settled into a heavy quiet. For the first time in months, I wasn't the one defending myself. They were. And the strange thing was, I didn't feel triumphant. Just steady. As if everything that was happening was simply the result of gravity, finally pulling in the right direction. When they called us back into the boardroom, the air felt heavier. Not louder, not more dramatic. Just heavier. Like something important had already been decided, and we were just there to hear the announcement. Martin walked in with a too bright smile that didn't match his eyes. Victor followed behind him, shoulders tight, face pale. The independent director, the former CFO, sat with her hands folded, expression neutral, in that way only people who have already seen the outcome can manage. Martin cleared his throat. "Thank you for your patience," he said. "We've had a productive discussion." He didn't look at me. That, more than anything, told me how productive it had really been. The chair of the board, an older man who normally liked to let Martin run the show, spoke next. His tone was different this time, less indulgent, more surgical. "We've reviewed the fund's initial proposal," he said, nodding toward Hartley, "and we believe it warrants serious exploration. We've also discussed some concerns regarding recent internal practices." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. Martin shifted in his chair. Victor stared fixedly at the table. "Our next steps," the chair continued, "will be to authorize formal due diligence, appoint an independent committee to negotiate potential terms, and, in parallel, conduct an internal review of governance processes." Internal review. Polite code for, "We're going to see how badly you've been cutting corners." The meeting didn't explode after that. There was no shouting, no dramatic walkouts, just a controlled unwinding. Questions about timing, questions about structure. The kind of precise logistical talk that means the real decision, the emotional one, has already happened. Before we adjourned, the independent director asked one last question. "Mr. Lawson," she said, looking directly at me, "do you feel your position here has been negatively affected by your refusal to provide personal financing?" The room went quiet again. I took a breath. I thought about every late-night email, every withheld bonus, every time my boundaries had been treated as a problem to solve. "Yes," I said, "I do." No speech, no monologue, just the truth, on record. She nodded once. Noted. The meeting ended shortly after. On the surface, nothing changed that day. We all went back to our offices. The fluorescent lights still hummed. The coffee was still burnt. But under the surface, fault lines had already shifted. The fund's lawyers moved in. The independent committee started asking different questions, and the illusion that Martin and Victor were untouchable evaporated. It took months. Real change always does. Lawyers drafted drafts of drafts. Valuations were revisited. Debt structures were picked apart. Shareholders negotiated, threatened to walk, came back. More than once it looked like the whole deal might collapse under the weight of egos and fear. But gravity kept working. The fund had leverage, numbers, capital, and time. The company didn't. Earnings trickled in weaker than forecast. The temporary issues Martin had sold to the board started looking permanent. And every time someone tried to paint too optimistic a picture, there was now a documented pattern of pressure and misrepresentation sitting in a folder with my name on it. Eventually, the math became clearer than the politics. 6 months after that first explosive meeting, the board voted to accept the fund's offer. The company would get fresh capital, restructured debt, and a new governance framework. The fund would take a controlling stake. And the existing leadership, they'd transition out over the next 90 days. The announcement email used all the usual language. Excited for the next chapter, grateful for their years of service, poised for growth. But inside the building, everyone understood. This wasn't a promotion. It was a clean, calculated removal. The day Martin announced his resignation internally, he gathered the senior team in the auditorium. He stood on the stage, talking about market cycles and strategic shifts. Victor sat 2 rows in front of me, clapping at the right moments, looking like a man trying to remember how he'd ended up here. Afterwards, people drifted out in clusters. Some were shocked, some were secretly relieved. A few came up to me with those searching looks, like they were seeing me for the first time. Our head of HR caught me near the aisle. "So," she said quietly, "you really didn't lend them the money?" "No," I said. She studied me for a second, then nodded. "Good," she said. Someone had to say no to them eventually. The strangest part of all of it was how normal my days stayed. I still closed the month, cleaned up mistakes, walked junior analysts through variance reports. But there was a difference now. The new people from the fund listened when I spoke. They asked for my input on what had gone wrong, but also on what actually worked and was worth keeping. They weren't interested in saving anyone's ego. They were interested in saving the business. A few weeks into the transition, one of the partners from the fund asked me to grab coffee. "We're restructuring finance," he said. "You've clearly got the background to run it. If you want the CFO track, we can have that conversation." There it was, the kind of offer my younger self would have jumped at without thinking. I thought for a long moment before I answered. "I appreciate it," I said. "Really, but I don't want to be on the inside of this place anymore. Not like that." He didn't look offended. If anything, he looked like he'd been expecting it. "What do you want?" he asked. "Clear edges," I said. "I'll help you understand the numbers, help you design processes that don't punish the people doing the actual work. But I want to do it from the outside, advisory, finite scope. And when we're done, I want the freedom to walk away." He smiled. "That can be arranged." So we arranged it. We formalized a transition. I'd stay for 6 months as a senior advisor during the handover, help build the reporting structure, hire and train my replacement, then step out. My salary stayed the same. The petty punishments stopped. For the first time since I'd joined, my calendar wasn't a weapon. On Victor's last day, I ran into him in the parking garage. He was putting the last box into his trunk. The suit he wore looked expensive. The expression on his face didn't. He saw me and straightened like he expected a speech. Gloating, maybe, or some kind of lecture. I didn't give him either. "Rough year," he said, voice flat. "Yeah," I said. "It was." He hesitated. "You could have backed us. You know that, right? Things might have gone differently." I shook my head. "No. You could have stopped treating people like walking balance sheets. That would have made things different." He flinched, just a little. "I didn't do this to you," I added. "You did it to yourself when you decided my value here depended on how much of my personal life I was willing to mortgage." He didn't have an answer for that. Eventually he just nodded, got in his car, and drove off. I watched the taillights disappear and felt nothing dramatic. No triumph, no hunger for revenge, just a steady, quiet sense that a chapter had finally closed the way it was supposed to. After my advisory period ended, I left the building for the last time with a single box, a plant, a couple of notebooks, a mug someone had given me as a joke that said "Spreadsheet Whisper." No security escort, no awkward speech, just a badge dropped off at reception and a walk out to a truck that I still hadn't replaced, even though I could have a long time ago. These days, I still sit in boardrooms sometimes. Different ones. I review numbers for companies that actually want to hear what those numbers mean. I invest in a few of them through funds I trust. I say no a lot more than I say yes. But there's one rule I don't bend anymore. If someone treats my bank account like a personality trait or my boundaries like a temporary obstacle, I don't negotiate. I don't explain. I don't let them make it my job to fix their mess. I just stand up, thank them for their time, and walk out. Because once you've watched an entire leadership team lose everything they thought they were entitled to because they couldn't accept one person's right to say no, you stop feeling guilty about protecting yourself. And the day my boss saw 12 million next to my name, that was the day I stopped acting like I owed anyone an apology for it.